They say blood is thicker than water, but what happens when the person who nearly spills your blood carries your family name? What happens when the woman who calls you mom turns out to be the one who wants you gone? My name is Angela Brooks, though most people call me Angie. At 73 years old, I never imagined I'd find myself lying in a hospital bed, staring at the sterile ceiling tiles, knowing that my own daughter-in-law had tried to kill me. Before we dive back in, let us know where you're tuning in from. If this story resonates with you, don't forget to hit that subscribe button because tomorrow, I've got something even more special lined up just for you. At 73, I was starting to feel like my body had begun to betray me. It wasn't just the physical aches that come with age, but the subtle creeping fear that one day, I would no longer be able to manage on my own. But what was far more terrifying than the slow, inevitable decline of my body was the thought of someone close to me taking advantage of that vulnerability. And that's when Sarah Morrison entered the picture. Sarah was my son Michael's fiancée, a polished, confident woman who exuded an air of kindness and care. She was exactly the kind of person you would want around when you were feeling fragile, or so I thought at first. But as the days wore on, I began to see the cracks in her polished exterior, the subtle hints that she wasn't as benevolent as she appeared. The gentle coaxing, the insistence that I should move into a senior living facility, the endless discussions about how much easier my life would be if I just let go of my house and my independence. It all seemed innocent at first, until I started questioning her motives. One evening, Michael and Sarah came over for a visit, and that's when the real pressure started. They suggested I consider moving to Golden Years Manor, a luxury senior care facility that they had already researched. They painted a picture of peace and comfort, a community where I could live out my later years without worrying about managing the house or my health. Sarah's pitch was convincing, but something about it didn't sit right with me. There was an urgency in her voice, a sense that she wanted me to make a decision quickly, as though she were trying to get me into the facility before I could change my mind. "Don't you want peace of mind?" she said, smiling so sweetly it almost seemed genuine. "You deserve to be somewhere safe, where you don't have to worry about the house or the yard or anything else. Michael and I will feel so much better knowing you're taken care of." I couldn't deny the appeal of her offer. The house had become too much to manage, and I had started to feel the weight of my years. But the more I thought about it, the more I began to wonder. Why was she so insistent? Why was she pushing so hard for me to move? There was something behind her smile that made me uneasy. And then came the talk of my house. That was when the red flags really began to wave. Sarah suggested that once I was in the facility, we could sell the house. "It's too big for you now," she said, her tone soft yet authoritative. "The market is still good, and Michael and I can help you handle everything." She spoke as though it was already decided, as though I had no choice but to give it up. But what Sarah didn't know was that I wasn't as naive as she thought. I had lived long enough to recognize manipulation when I saw it. And her smile, her kindness, it all seemed like a mask, a well-crafted act designed to lull me into a false sense of security. The more I thought about it, the more I realized I wasn't the one who needed help. It was Sarah. So, I started paying attention, watching her closely. I made a point to document everything, every conversation, every meeting, every suggestion she made. And what I discovered chilled me to the bone. Sarah had a pattern. She had been involved in a contentious divorce, one that was marred by allegations of financial fraud. She had a history of being manipulative, of using her charm and her position to control people and get what she wanted. And the more I learned about her financial situation, the more it became clear, she was desperate. Desperate for money, desperate for control, and perhaps most dangerously, desperate to cover up her mounting debts. As I dug deeper, I realized that Sarah wasn't just trying to get me into a care facility for my own good. She wanted my assets. My house. My savings. Everything I had worked for. And she would do anything to get it. I knew I needed help. I called my lawyer, Jim Patterson, and explained everything to him. His response was immediate and direct. "Angela, it sounds like you're dealing with someone who's using you as a stepping stone to get what she wants." Jim had seen enough of this kind of manipulation to recognize it for what it was, and he assured me that he would help me take action. But I wasn't going to sit back and wait. I knew Sarah was about to make her move, and I had to be ready. That's when I hired Maria Santos, a private investigator, to dig into Sarah's past. What Maria found confirmed my worst fears. Sarah had racked up tens of thousands of dollars in debt, had defaulted on payments to her ex-husband, and had even borrowed money from dangerous people. People who didn't take kindly to not getting paid back. It was clear now. Sarah wasn't just trying to move me into Golden Years Manor. She was trying to take my money, my house, and everything I had left. But I wasn't going to let her. I had spent too many years building a life for myself to let someone like Sarah tear it all down. But what could I do? I wasn't going to let her get away with it. I began to formulate a plan to protect myself, to ensure that no matter how hard Sarah pushed, she would not get what she wanted. I wasn't just going to roll over and let her win. I was going to fight back. The question was, how? That's when I realized I needed to turn the tables. I had spent enough time in the shadows of Sarah's manipulation, but now it was time to take control. I wasn't going to let her trick me into a vulnerable position, and I wasn't about to hand over my hard-earned assets without a fight. I had already taken one important step. I called Jim Patterson, my lawyer, to make some changes to my legal documents. I revoked Michael's power of attorney, a move that would stop Sarah from taking full control over my finances. It wasn't an easy decision, but it was necessary. Michael, who I once trusted completely, was now under Sarah's spell, and I couldn't afford to let him make decisions for me anymore. Jim helped me set up a new legal framework. I established a living trust, one that would make it almost impossible for anyone to challenge my wishes after I was gone. I made sure to update my will as well, leaving my house to a charity, with explicit language explaining that my decision was made due to the pressure and manipulation I had been under from Michael and Sarah. As for the rest of my assets, I was careful. I made sure that any financial decisions required joint approval from both Jim and my sister, Helen. I wasn't going to make it easy for Sarah to weasel her way into my financial life. She would have to go through multiple layers of protection now. The next step was security. I wasn't about to wait around for Sarah or Michael to act on their threats. I needed to protect myself physically as well as financially. I reached out to a security company Jim recommended, and within a matter of hours, they installed cameras in my home, covering every major room and entrance. They also set up an alarm system, ensuring that no one could get near me without being caught on camera. It was a safety net that I didn't know I needed until I had it, but once it was in place, I felt a sense of calm wash over me. The hardest part was going to be the confrontation. I knew I had to face Sarah and Michael one more time, but this time, it would be on my terms. I had everything in place now. Legal protection, physical security, and most importantly, evidence. It was time to make Sarah's true nature known, to expose her for the predator she was. Then came the call that would set everything in motion. Michael told me that he'd scheduled the tour of Golden Years Manor for the following day, and that Sarah was excited to show me around. He was so sure that I would love the place, as though this decision had already been made in his mind. "I'm sure I will," I replied, though I didn't feel sure at all. In fact, my stomach twisted just thinking about the place. The sterile, controlled environment where I would have no say in my own life, surrounded by people who only wanted to take advantage of my vulnerability. When the day arrived, I put on my friliest appearance, carefully choosing clothes that made me look weak, unsure, and easy to manipulate. I wasn't about to give Sarah the satisfaction of seeing me strong or confident. I needed her to believe I was exactly the kind of person she thought she could control. Michael and Sarah arrived promptly, and we set off for the facility. Sarah couldn't hide her excitement, talking non-stop about how wonderful everything was going to be for me. How safe I would be, how much more comfortable I'd be in a place like Golden Years Manor. She practically gushed over every detail. When we arrived, I was greeted by Brenda, the saleswoman from my first visit. Her smile was as fake as ever, though I feigned enthusiasm and pretended it was my first time there. The tour began just like last time, Brenda showing me around the common areas, touting the community atmosphere and tailored care programs designed to make life easier for the residents. But this time, I watched Sarah closely. I noticed that she wasn't just familiar with the facility. She knew it like the back of her hand. She knew which hallways led where, which bathrooms were closest to the dining room, and even which elevator was the fastest. Staff members looked at her with more than just recognition. They looked at her with an almost knowing glance, one that didn't belong to a first-time visitor. That's when it hit me. Sarah had been here before. More than once. And not just as a visitor. She had spent significant time here, perhaps even staying as a resident herself. My suspicion deepened. What was she really planning? During the tour, I asked a lot of questions. Questions designed to dig deeper into the facility's operation and policies, especially regarding financial matters. I pressed Brenda on how Golden Years Manor managed payments and what kind of financial protections they had in place for residents. Brenda explained their lien rights. How, in the event of non-payment, the facility could claim ownership of personal property, even real estate. My heart sank. I now understood the real trap that Sarah was setting for me. If she could get me into this facility, she could control my finances, take my house, and isolate me from the world. She was setting up a system that would allow her to take everything, all while presenting herself as the caring, concerned fiancé who was only looking out for my best interests. I had to get out before it was too late. After the tour, Sarah was practically buzzing with excitement, ready to get my application in. She pushed me to complete paperwork right away, to finalize my move in quickly, as though everything had already been decided. But I wasn't going to let her rush me into anything. I think I'd like to take these forms home and review them, I said, careful to keep my voice steady. Of course, she said, though the frustration in her eyes was evident. As we drove back, Sarah continued to press for a decision. The apartment I had been shown was so perfect, she insisted. Michael echoed her, telling me how relieved he would be once I was settled in. Mom, this really is the best thing for you, he said, as though my input didn't matter. You'll be so much safer, and you won't have to worry about the house anymore. But I wasn't going to let them win. I knew I had to act fast, but I also knew that this was far from over. I had just one chance to turn the tables. That night, I met with Jim Patterson to finalize the legal documents I had been preparing for weeks. I told him everything, about Sarah's threats, the facility's contracts, and my growing suspicion about her true intentions. Angela, I think we have enough to move forward with, Jim said. We need to start gathering evidence. If Sarah is really planning what I think she is, we need to act before she escalates. And so, we set the plan into motion. I was going to confront Sarah one last time. This time, I would be ready. The stage was set. I had everything I needed to make my stand against Sarah. The legal protections were in place. The security system was armed. The evidence I had gathered from my audio recordings, the recordings from the new security cameras, and Maria's investigative work were all carefully documented. I had built a fortress of legal and physical defenses, but now came the hardest part. I had to face Sarah head-on. The next day, Michael called to remind me of the urgency. He was pushing for me to finalize everything with Golden Years Manor. The pressure was mounting, and I could feel it. Sarah was so certain I would comply, and she was getting desperate. Desperate people make mistakes, and I knew she would make one soon enough. I needed to make sure I wasn't just protecting myself legally and physically, but also psychologically. I couldn't let her see how much I had already uncovered. I had to pretend to be the weak, confused woman she thought I was. This would be my performance. I had to play the part of the fragile elderly woman while silently gathering the last pieces of the puzzle. I met with Jim one final time before the confrontation. He reassured me that we were prepared, but his face was serious. Angela, this could go sideways. Sarah is dangerous, and if she realizes what you're doing, she might escalate things quickly. But if you go through with this, we can stop her for good. I nodded. I know. I'm ready. The plan was simple. I would invite Sarah over to discuss the Golden Years Manor paperwork, acting like I had finally come around to her way of thinking. The goal was to get her to make explicit threats or confessions that would tie her to the crimes. Detective Mills would be outside, listening to everything through the hidden surveillance equipment. If anything went wrong, they would intervene. When Sarah arrived, she was full of forced enthusiasm, carrying a bottle of wine like she was the loving daughter. She didn't know I already saw through the act. I invited her in and led her to the kitchen, where we'd sit and go over the papers. "Angela, I'm so glad you called," she said, flashing me a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She had no idea that I knew her game. "I was getting worried that you might back out." I played along, pretending I was ready to give in. "I've had second thoughts," I said, feigning hesitation. "Maybe you're right about Golden Years Manor. I need to make a decision, and I don't want to waste any more time." She looked pleased, leaning forward with that predatory gleam in her eyes. "Exactly. The sooner we get everything in order, the sooner we can move on with your life. It's all about security, Angela. You don't want to risk living here alone any longer." I could hear the underlying threat in her voice. She wanted me to think I had no other option. She wanted me scared, vulnerable. But I wasn't about to give her the satisfaction. As we went through the paperwork, I steered the conversation toward the financial aspects. "I'm a bit concerned about the house. What if I don't get it sold quickly enough to pay for the facility? What if something unexpected happens?" Sarah's eyes lit up, and I saw her start to unravel her plan. "That's why Michael and I are here to help," she said quickly. "We'll take care of everything for you. We can help with the house sale, and in the meantime, we can make sure you're covered financially." I kept pressing, letting her think I was still unsure. But what if something goes wrong with the sale? I wouldn't want to be a burden. "Angela, you won't be a burden," Sarah said, practically snapping at me. "You'll be taken care of. Michael and I will help, and everything will fall into place. Your house, your accounts, it'll all be settled." Her impatience was starting to show, and I was carefully listening for the slip-up I knew would come. It didn't take long. "What happens if I don't want to move into Golden Years Manor?" I asked casually. "What if I want to stay here a little longer?" Her face hardened in an instant, the mask of concern slipping entirely. "Angela," she said in a low voice, "you don't have a choice. You're not getting any younger. You're not in good health. You can't keep living alone in this house forever. You need to be realistic." I saw the anger bubbling beneath the surface. The woman who had once appeared so sweet and caring now looked like the monster she truly was. Then, she leaned forward and made the mistake I was waiting for. "You need to accept the truth, Angela. This house isn't going to sell itself, and your time is running out. If you don't move into Golden Years Manor, things will only get worse for you. Your house will be a liability. Your health will deteriorate. And, well, accidents can happen to people who refuse help. Just like before." She said it. There it was, clear as day. She was threatening me, openly this time. The same threat she'd made before, that night when she pushed me down the stairs. She had just admitted it. She was responsible for my fall, and she was willing to do it again. At that moment, I knew I had her. I excused myself, pretending to need some time to think. But instead, I went to my office, where I activated the hidden camera and made sure everything was rolling. Then I texted Detective Mills, giving him the signal. The trap was set. When I returned to the kitchen, Sarah was talking on her phone, her voice low and urgent. "No, I told you, it's going to be soon. A few more days, maybe a week at the outside." She looked up as I walked in, and her expression shifted, realizing I had heard enough. But it was too late. "What's that about?" I asked, feigning curiosity. She quickly hung up, her face tightening. "Just work stuff," she said, her voice forced. But the damage was done. I had heard her plan. She was making arrangements, not just for my house, but for her escape. She was planning on making me disappear, using my assets to pay off her violent creditors and then disappearing herself. I sat back down and stared her in the eyes. "Now, Sarah, let's finish this. I want to get these forms filled out. But I need to know one thing. What's going to happen to my money and my house when I'm in Golden Years Manor? What if I need my savings? What if I need something else that they don't provide? Her mask of civility cracked completely. You're going to lose everything, Angela. You won't need it. You'll be in the facility, taken care of. What's left will go to your family, people who care about you, unlike those who just want to take advantage. She leaned forward, glaring at me. If you don't cooperate, you'll be alone. No one will care for you, and you'll die in that house. Is that what you want? I felt a chill run down my spine, but I didn't flinch. This was it. This was the moment I'd been preparing for. The door slammed open, and Detective Mills, followed by 2 officers, stormed in. Police. Put your hands where we can see them. Sarah froze, her eyes wide with shock and fury. What is this? She demanded, but the officers were already handcuffing her. Sarah Morrison, Detective Mills said with calm authority. You're under arrest for attempted murder, elder abuse, and conspiracy to commit financial fraud. Her face twisted into a mask of disbelief and anger. This is ridiculous, she shouted, struggling against the officers. Angela, tell them this is a mistake. I looked her in the eye, finally seeing the woman she truly was. The only misunderstanding is yours, Sarah. You thought you could break me. You thought you could steal my life. But you were wrong. As the officers led her away, she turned back one last time, glaring at me with pure hatred. This isn't over, she spat. Michael will never believe you. You've destroyed your relationship with your own son. I stood tall, unshaken. My relationship with Michael was destroyed the day you entered our lives, I said. But now he'll see the truth. You'll pay for what you did. Detective Mills sat down at my kitchen table, nodding at me in admiration. That was incredibly brave, Angela. We've got her now. Your recordings, the evidence, it's airtight. As Sarah was taken away, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The nightmare was over. The predator had been caught, and I was free. But even more than that, I had protected what mattered most. My life, my assets, and my dignity. The worst part of the ordeal was over, but I knew that there was still a lot of work ahead to rebuild my life, especially with Michael. But as long as I had the truth on my side, I would rebuild. I'd always rise, no matter how many times someone tried to push me down. And this time, I was doing it on my own terms. The air in my house felt different the morning after Sarah's arrest. It was quiet. It was peaceful. But it was also heavy, as if the walls themselves were exhaling a sigh of relief after holding their breath for months. The ordeal was over, but the aftermath was only beginning. Sarah was in custody, but her plans had left deep scars. Michael's betrayal, the lies, the manipulation. It would take time to repair the trust that had been shattered between us. But for the first time in a long while, I felt like I had control again. When Michael came to visit me later that morning, I saw the weight of regret in his eyes before he even spoke. He had stayed up all night, processing everything that had happened, and I could tell he was struggling with the truth. His voice trembled when he apologized. Mom, I don't know how to say this. I should have known. I should have seen what Sarah was doing. But I didn't. I believed her lies. I was so wrapped up in her that I let her pull me away from you. I didn't want to be harsh, but I couldn't just sweep it under the rug. You did, Michael. You let her manipulate you. But I can't let you off the hook so easily. You put me in a position where I had to fight for everything. You chose her over me. His face crumpled. I know. I'm sorry. But I want to make it right. I'll do whatever it takes to earn your trust back. I looked at my son, the boy I had raised, the one I'd held in my arms when he was small and scared, the one I had loved through every mistake and triumph. I knew this would be hard. But there was a part of me that still wanted to believe in him. I want to believe you, Michael. I really do. But you have to understand that actions speak louder than words. You have to prove to me that you see me as a person, Your mother, not a burden. It's not going to be easy for either of us, but if you're truly committed to this, we'll take it one step at a time. He nodded, his eyes full of resolve. I will. I promise. That evening, as I sat alone in my kitchen, I couldn't help but think back to the night everything changed, the night I fell down the stairs. What Sarah had done to me was not just about money. It was about power. It was about stripping me of my dignity, my autonomy, my life. She hadn't just wanted to control my finances, she'd wanted to control me. And for a while, I had allowed it to happen. But now I understood that age didn't equal weakness. It didn't make me easy prey. I wasn't a helpless woman waiting for others to make my decisions. I was Angela Brooks, a woman who had fought for everything she had, and I wasn't about to let anyone take it from me. The day after Sarah's arrest, I decided to take the first step in rebuilding my life. I called my lawyer, Jim Patterson, and scheduled an appointment to go over the final details of my new will and living trust. Angela, I can't tell you how relieved I am that we're past the worst of this, Jim said when I walked into his office. The evidence you've gathered is solid. The police will be able to charge Sarah with elder abuse, attempted murder, and financial fraud. But now we need to focus on protecting you moving forward. I nodded. I've made the changes. But I want to make sure my assets are fully protected, especially my house. I've lived here for years, and I'm not going to let anyone take it from me. Jim smiled. That's what I like to hear. We'll make sure everything is legally locked down, Angela. No one can touch what's yours without going through a very long and difficult legal process. As we reviewed the documents, I felt a sense of finality. Everything was in place. No one could take my home. No one could control my finances. It was a new beginning. Later that week, Michael came by again. He had been going through a lot of emotional turmoil, but he was trying. I saw it in his eyes, the effort he was putting into understanding how he had wronged me. He had already made a few phone calls to counselors, and he wanted to start therapy, not just to work through his feelings about Sarah, but to better understand how he could repair his relationship with me. We sat down at the kitchen table, just the two of us. There was an awkwardness in the air, but also an unspoken desire to move forward. Mom, Michael began, his voice tentative. I know I've hurt you, and I can't take back the things I did. But I'm asking for a chance to prove that I can be the son you deserve. It's not going to be easy. I know that. But I'll do whatever it takes. I didn't have all the answers. I wasn't sure if I was ready to fully forgive him yet. But I also knew that he was trying, really trying, and that was all I could ask for. I'm not going to make promises, Michael. But I'll try. I'll try to trust you again, but it's going to take time. And we're going to have to rebuild, slowly. He nodded, looking both relieved and pained. I understand. We spent the next hour just talking, about everything and nothing at all. The years of tension were still there, but for the first time in a long time, I could see a path forward. Not just for me, but for both of us. The hardest part, I knew, was still ahead. It would take time for Michael to fully grasp the gravity of the manipulation he had fallen under, and it would take even longer for him to heal from the emotional wounds of the past. But for the first time in a long time, I felt hope. Hope that the relationship we had could be rebuilt, even if it had to be done brick by brick. The following weeks passed in a blur of legal proceedings, meetings with Michael, and personal reflection. Sarah's arrest made the news in our area, and the more I heard about the details of her manipulations, the more I understood how deep the hole she had dug for me really was. She wasn't just after my money. She had been targeting other elderly victims before me. But her game was over. She had made one fatal mistake. She underestimated me. And in doing so, she destroyed herself. It took months for Michael to truly understand the extent of his role in Sarah's manipulation, but eventually, he began to see the truth. We worked through a lot of the pain, and he took responsibility for his actions. But it was clear that he had learned a painful lesson in the process, one that would stay with him for the rest of his life. Over time, I started to feel like myself again. The house that had once felt like a prison now felt like my sanctuary. I tended my garden with pride, cooked my meals in the kitchen that still smelled of love, and slept in the room where I had spent so many years with Robert. The trauma of the past year would never fully leave me, but it no longer had a hold on me. I had faced down a predator, protected my home, and reclaimed my life. Most importantly, I had learned that strength doesn't always come from fighting back. It often comes from knowing when to stand your ground and when to rise above the manipulation and lies. In the end, I didn't just survive. I thrived. And that's the kind of victory that can never be taken away. As I sat on the porch, watching the sun set behind the oak trees that had stood for decades, I realized that I wasn't just stronger now. I was free. And that, in the end, was the greatest victory of all. The nightmare was behind me. The future was mine to shape. As the weeks passed, life in my home slowly began to return to a rhythm of normalcy. The storm that had raged for so long, Sarah's manipulations, her threats, the feeling of being trapped, finally began to subside. It was a strange feeling, like the weight of the world had been lifted off my shoulders, but with it came an overwhelming sense of relief and exhaustion. I spent more time in the garden, where I had always felt a sense of peace. The flowers were in bloom, their colors vibrant against the green backdrop of the yard. My hands, once weathered by years of nurturing the earth, found solace in the soil again. There was something healing about the simple act of planting, of watching life grow. It reminded me that no matter how much damage life throws your way, there's always room for renewal, for rebirth. Michael was still making strides in his journey to make amends. He had started therapy as he promised, and though there were days of deep reflection and painful realizations, I could see the earnest effort in him. He had a long way to go, but the fact that he was finally looking at the situation with clarity was a good start. One evening, he came over to the house after his therapy session. His eyes were tired but resolute, and there was a softness to his voice that had been missing for a long time. "I know it's going to take time," he began, sitting across from me at the kitchen table. "But I want to make sure you feel safe again, Mom. I want to make sure I'm the son you deserve, not the one who let you down." I nodded, feeling a warmth in my chest that I hadn't felt in months. "I can't promise things will go back to the way they were, Michael," I said softly, "but we can move forward. Slowly, step by step." He reached across the table and took my hand in his, something that felt like a gesture of both apology and hope. "Thank you for giving me that chance," he said, his voice full of gratitude. We talked more that evening, about the future, about rebuilding trust, about the small moments that had once seemed insignificant but now felt like a bridge back to each other. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. And that was enough for now. In the weeks that followed, I found myself gaining strength, not just from the peace I was cultivating within my home, but from the way my community had rallied around me. Neighbors who had known me for years checked in, offering support and solidarity. The local senior center invited me to attend a few of their events, not out of pity, but out of genuine desire to make sure I was still part of the world outside my house. I declined the offer to move into a senior living facility once more, choosing instead to continue living independently, with the full knowledge that I was capable of taking care of myself. It was empowering. Every day I lived, every decision I made, was a reaffirmation of my autonomy. I realized I didn't need to depend on anyone else to define my worth or my future. I had been through hell, but I had come out the other side stronger, wiser, and with a renewed sense of who I was. Meanwhile, Sarah's situation worsened. Her trial was set, and the charges against her were severe: elder abuse, attempted murder, financial fraud, and conspiracy. The evidence against her was overwhelming. The recordings, the financial documents, the testimonies from people who had been victimized by her. It was all there, painted in the starkest of colors. And in the end, justice would come for her, just as it should. But as satisfying as that might have been, I couldn't help but feel a certain emptiness when I thought about it. Her destruction had been inevitable, given her desperation, her greed, and her complete disregard for human decency. But it didn't make me feel victorious. In a way, it only underscored the tragedy of it all. Sarah had been so consumed by her own desires that she had destroyed everything she could have had: love, respect, and the possibility of a future built on trust. And in the end, she had lost it all. Prison would be her reality, and any chance of rebuilding her life would be gone. Her creditors would never be paid, and her debts would haunt her for the rest of her life. It was a fate she had sealed for herself. And although I didn't feel joy in her downfall, I did feel a sense of finality. Justice had been served, and it was the right outcome. Michael and I continued our journey together, finding new ground on which to rebuild. But it wasn't just him who was healing. It was me, too. I had learned that life wasn't about the things you held on to. It was about the people you chose to trust, the strength you found within yourself, and the ability to stand firm in the face of adversity. I had faced betrayal, threats, and manipulation, but I had also found something far more valuable: my own voice. I had found my courage again. And that was something no one, no matter how desperate, no matter how manipulative, could ever take from me. And so, life went on. The house on Maple Street, once filled with the echoes of my doubts, now rang with the peace of a new chapter. The oak trees outside stood tall, their branches reaching for the sky, much like me. I wasn't done yet. My story wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning.